All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises, honor, and glory to YAHAWASHI, YAHAWASHI, Bashem, Makakwadash. Double honor to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Shalom to the Akim and a few out who may be listening. This is your brother Bataka Lot from the GMS camp here in Chicago, coming back at you with another lesson through the Spirit and power, YAHAWASHI, YAHAWASHI. And Lord willing, this will be an edifying lesson. The title of this lesson is YAHAWASHI is in the fire with us. All right, and brothers are going through a lot of things, whether it be, physically, spiritually, financially, at their job, whatever, with their family, with their woman, whatever. All right, brothers are going through it out here because we're going through the fire right now. But all of these things are to make us better and make us fit for salvation. Lord willing, we be at that number. All right. And Lord willing, we don't get offended in the Lord. But we get these precepts just to back this up, and then we're going to close it out. All right, this is Daniel 3:19. It says, Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visions was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it ought to be heated. So Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of himself and forced all of his subjects to worship this statue. And at this particular time, we were under the Babylonian captivity. All right. So that included Israelites that would have to worship the statue. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego among those Israelites. And they refused to worship, all right, because they worship YAHAWASHI, YAHAWASHI, and they weren't going to worship an idol, all right? And because they refused to worship, the king, he wanted to put them to death for that, all right? And he attempted to, and that's what we're about to read. Okay, so verse 20, it says, and he was going to put them to death by putting them in a furnace and heating it up 7 times hotter than it was supposed to be heated, to stick them in there, all right, to try to make an example of them to the other people. This is verse Daniel 3:20. It says, and he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So Nebuchadnezzar told his men to throw, the three holy children into the fire. And what ended up happening is the men that were supposed to throw them in there died before they even got in the fire. Like when they was taking them over there, the men that was taking them over there basically burned to death on with them getting close to the fire. They didn't even get all the way in the furnace, and they burned to death. That's how hot it was. All right. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. All right, so 3 holy children are in the fire, inside of the furnace that just killed the mighty men that were throwing them in there just for getting close. All right, they didn't enter the midst of the furnace like the 3 holy children did. They burned, approaching the fire, basically. This is verse 24. It says, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of them. Salakia. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So while they were in the fire, the spirit of YAHAWASHI was in the fire with them. And they were in there walking around, moving around, cool. No pain, no injuries, no burning, nothing. YAHAWASHI protected them while they were in that fire. All right. And that's the same thing that's happening with us. All right, all we have to do is to hold up our end of the bargain to the Lord and endure to the end, Lord willing, to receive salvation. All right, but YAHAWASHI is with us on this walk, man, and you have to remember that. All right, where the scripture says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am in the midst thereof. All right, and guess what? Even if you're not necessarily physically with brothers, all right, the men of GMS, we're one body, all right, and we're all gathered in the name of YAHAWASHI, okay? And we're connected through the Spirit, and we can communicate and connect with one another, via the internet, over the phones, etc. When we're watching the videos, all of that, okay? So Yahawashi is with us, man. And you have to remember that, and you got to believe that, especially when you're in the fire. All right. Because, we're going to get this First Corinthians, and then I'll make the point. This First Corinthians 10:13, it says, there hath no temptation taken you but such as is common to man. But Yahweh is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So the Lord is not going to put on us a burden that we can't bear. All right. It's our job not to get offended in the Lord, and to understand that we're being tried and we're being refined into being, a greater man, and something that's worthy of salvation from Yahweh Bashem Yahawashi. But it's a process of going through pain, of going through tough situations, of going through the fire in order to become that man. All right. But always, remember that while you're in that situation, hey, the Lord has a certain thing that he wants to fulfill with whatever it is that he puts you through. But as soon as that is fulfilled, the Lord is already ready with your escape. All right. And you have to remember that, and you have to believe that. And, of course, it's easier said than done. We in this flesh, and, we have to learn how to be faithful in Yahweh Bashem Yahawashi. We have to be reprogrammed in order to know how to do that, because we've been programmed in the ways of wickedness in this world. All right. So, yeah, we're going to go through things. But guess what? Just like the scripture says that the Lord proves a friend. Hey, man, when we're put in these rough situations and the Lord delivers us from these situations, that's the Lord showing us that he's there with us, too. All right. And it's only going to happen in situations where shit is not going cool. Why does the Lord need to come and deliver you from a situation that's good, that's going well? All right. Now, the Lord, of course, blesses us with everything that we have. All right. The Lord is the one responsible for the good and the bad in our lives. All right. But guess what? The way that Jake thinks, if things are going great, they're not going to give the Lord his credit. They're going to think that they're the ones that did what happened. They're the ones that made the miracle. They're the ones that, did something so great. It's only when you're in a low state and you don't have any power that when the Lord delivers you, you acknowledge that this was Yahweh Bashem Yahawashi that did that. All right. Now, once you get on a level and you have that understanding, then, like I said, we understand that the Lord is responsible for all things. OK, but, we have to learn to trust the Lord over again. That's a part of what we're going through in this walk. All right. And learn to lean on the Lord over again, because we've been leaning on this wickedness, this devil, this society, this world. That's what we've been leaning on. False idols. OK. And it's a process. This is Sirach 2:1. It says, my son, if thou come to serve Yahweh, prepare thy soul for temptation, set thy heart aright, and continually endure, and make not haste in time of trouble. So the Lord is telling us that, hey, if you're going to embark on this journey in this truth, you're going to go through some things. All right, let's keep going. It says, cleave unto him and depart not away, that thou mayest be increased at thy last end. So it's important that we don't get offended in Yahweh Bashem Yahawashi when we're going through these trials and tribulations. All right. Really, that's the time for us to draw closer to the Lord, for us to pray to the Lord even more and be more fervent in Yahweh Bashem Yahawashi. All right. Because at the end of all of these trials and tribulations, the increase comes. All right. First, you have to go through the situation, and then you get the increase after you endure whatever it is that you have to endure. That's how this works. And that's how everything in this world works. All right. Anybody that receives something without having to go through tribulation and trial to receive it don't value what they have, and they end up losing it or destroying it or doing something worse. Look at the way Esau takes care of the earth that the Lord has given into his hands. The earth is given into the hands of the wicked. The Lord allowed these devils to rule this earth, and look what they've done with it. Why? Because they're not going through the straight gate. They never had to go through the trials and tribulations that we had to go to. The reason that they've been given the earth is as a punishment unto us and to show us what not to do. It had nothing to do with them going through the straight gate or going through trials and tribulations. All right. This is the next verse, verse 4. It says, for whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, and be patient when thou art changed to a low estate. For gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity. And while you're in that fire, and while you're in the furnace of adversity, going through these trials and tribulations, Yahawashi is right there with you, man. And you got to believe that, and you got to understand that. And you got to know that it's not going to get out of hand. All we have to do is hold up our end of the bargain. All right? So with that, we're going to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bashem, Yahawashi, Bashem, Akakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Shalom to the Akim and the few Akwath who may be listening. Lord willing, this was an edifying lesson. Until next time, Shalom, Wa, Abababal.